He closed his eyes, screwing them shut as the world around him descended into a level of insanity that went far, far beyond regular run-of-the-mill madness. Explosions echoed through his mind, roaring thunderous crashes tore through reality as fiery metal shells tore into the earth below his feet. His heart pounded in his chest as the darkness behind his eyelids flashed to white with every seething hot eruption of energy. "Oh God," he muttered, panting desperately, his voice barely a whisper on the acrid air that was tinged with the stench of burning flesh and sulphur. He felt a sudden jolt as his body slumped to the ground. He had been dimly aware of sliding down a wooden ladder that led upwards to the land between the two opposing armies, and then he crashed into a damp, muddy puddle. The air all around was filled with the sound of men roaring triumphantly as they went over the top of the trench wall, and was punctuated by agonised screams as the staccato roar of enemy gunfire ripped through their soft, fleshy bodies. His mind was lost. He was swirling into the pit of complete chaos that his brain just wouldn't comprehend. And then, suddenly, everything was silent. It was a sharp suddenness that bathed its entire reality in nothing, ripping his previous something directly out of his mind, as if it had never been there at all. Slowly, gingerly, he began to open his eyes. In place of the foreboding carnage of a bloody war was a white, sterile room that seemed to glow with effervescent energy. The walls, if there were any at all, seemed impossibly far off in the distance, leaving him with the impression of being inside a white cube with no actual sides. "What?" he muttered to himself nervously. He sat up slowly, blinking to himself in confusion. "Corporal nonsense?" a voice asked behind him. He turned and his eyes widened. A cold tendril of dread wrapped itself around his spine and tightened. How could this get worse? The voice was cool and heavy and had the tone of cold honey poured across hot coals. The person whose face it had come out of was a woman that looked, oddly, exactly like his Uncle Jim, right down to the little scar on his right eyebrow he'd got cleaning his pistol without checking it wasn't loaded. Beside him sat a man that looked exactly like his aunt. This didn't make a great deal of sense, he realised, but he was oddly certain that it was them, as well as that it wasn't, couldn't have been, and so also couldn't have been anybody else. "What?" he said with a nervous whimper, feeling rather confused by all this. "Your name," the woman, who probably wasn't really his uncle, said. "Your name is Corporal Nonsense." "My name," he said, frowning to himself. "My name isn't Nonsense, it's Jerry Nostridge. I'm a corporal in the King's army." The two people that looked incorrectly, but precisely like his aunt and uncle, looked at one another behind a white and very functional-looking desk. They stared for a moment with a blank expression and then, both in unison, turned back. His aunt said, "Is that not what we said?" Jerry sat for a moment in his damp military uniform, black dirt smeared across his face, just staring back at them. "No," he said. "Not really. It was really quite different." Uncle Jim frowned for a moment and then said, "It's close enough." Jerry tried to stand up but felt the uncomfortable heft of his equipment pack strapped to his back and sides. He unfastened the metal clips and let the weight fall and noisily clatter to the polished white floor, if there actually was a floor beneath him. He stood up, gently easing himself up from the uncomfortable position he had landed in. There was no wet puddle to be seen, although a great deal of it was now uncomfortably clinging to his skin after having soaked through his heavy coarse green uniform. "Where am I?" he said. "Am I dead?" The man who looked absolutely identical to his aunt said, "I don't think so, but I'm not an expert in the matter." As he said it, the uncle scratched his forehead in a strangely familiar gesture while tapping buttons on a small flat device on the desk. "No," she said finally. "My research suggests that you're alive. Would you like to be dead?" As she spoke, the aunt pulled out a polished metal rod, held it up and brandished it with a friendly smile. "I can arrange that if that's what you wish," he added, less than helpfully. "We have technology that would make it spectacularly hilarious, and I can assure you, is almost entirely painless. I've tested it on many people, and I've never felt a thing, apart from a ringing in my ears from all the screaming." Jerry grunted to himself and edged away, holding up his hands. He swallowed hard as his head began to swim. "I don't want to be dead," he said urgently. "Don't kill me," he added, just to really nail the message home. The two people frowned slightly and looked to one another in confusion. The uncle said, "And I understand this correctly, you don't want to die?" Jerry just stared. The man who was, or maybe wasn't, his aunt looked very confused and said, "But you were in the middle of a war. What were you doing in the middle of a war if you didn't want to die?" The uncle shook her head in agreement. He added, It does seem rather the ideal place to be for someone who wants to die, but much less so if you're trying to avoid it. You can see why we're confused, can't you?" Jerry cried out in exasperation, "Of course I don't want to die. Nobody wants to die." The aunt said, "Our research suggests that you are in error. It appears to us that a great many people wish for their corporeal existence to cease. They certainly put a great deal of effort into it." "You mean the Great War?" Jerry said, not quite sure he was following all this correctly. The uncle chuckled to herself. She turned to the aunt and said softly, "He thinks war is great." The aunt shrugged and said, with a little chuckle of her own, "Well, compared to most of the other achievements in that century, it was fairly impressive. Have you seen their space program? It's embarrassing." "Quite." "Wait," Jerry said with a frown. "Who are you? What is this place?" "Now don't worry about that," the uncle told him. "You wouldn't understand anyway." "He might," his aunt said, sounding thoughtful. "We're part of a single unified being that has chosen to project itself in the form of a pleasant memory from your youth to make you feel more comfortable. Our technology is flawless. To you, this all seems perfectly natural and comforting." Jerry said coldly, "My Uncle Jim used to strangle neighbourhood cats." The uncle said, "You're welcome." He grinned horrifyingly before continuing. "We're scientists, I suppose you could say. We just borrowed random people from various points in time and space at the exact moment of their death. We've refined it since the incident in Tunguska, but it's still not ideal since it makes a bit of a flash. There's only so much we can learn from people dying from heart attacks at fireworks shows. In any case, we study them and send them right back to the same time. That way, nobody notices." "And you still get to enjoy your horrible death," the aunt said. "We aren't cruel. We don't want to keep you from your business." "What?" Jerry mumbled weakly. "I don't understand." "Tell us about why you were busy fighting a war," the aunt told him. "I'm especially interested in why you were there, if you're not planning to die." "Well, of course I didn't plan to die," Jerry assured them. "I'm afraid to die." The uncle leaned over and said sarcastically, "I bet he did really. They all do. I never met one of them that didn't end up dying in the end. They're totally preoccupied with it." "Well, I didn't have a choice about it, did I?" Jerry said, shaking his head. "I was told to do it. I was made to fight there." The uncle frowned curiously. "I don't understand." The aunt said, "But how did they force you? What did they threaten you with that was so much worse than your apparent fear of death?" "Well," Jerry grumbled to himself and screwed up his face thoughtfully, "they didn't threaten me, they just said that I had to do it." The two looked at one another. Eyebrows were raised. "We understand," the aunt said with a happy smile. "You want to do what you're told. You enjoy being made to do things." "No," Jerry said sternly. "Nobody likes being told to go to war." The two beings looked at each other again and simply shrugged. The uncle rubbed her forehead and said, "Then why do you do what you're told if you don't want to do it?" "We have to," Jerry said simply. "They're in charge, aren't they? These people that run the place, so we have no choice." "Ah, there's no choice," the aunt said. He frowned and began pressing buttons. He pointed to his desk and looked confused. She said, "According to our research, you did have a number of choices." "Not me," Jerry said moodily. "I was told to join the army, so I had to. It's not fair, but that's how life is." "Life is unfair." The aunt reached over and thoughtfully rubbed the uncle's chin. He made a curious expression and said to Jerry, "My records indicate that all human life comes out of a human female body in a most appalling manner. It's almost as appalling as the way it's put in there." "Research," the uncle rolled his eyes sarcastically. "Is that what we're calling it?" "It's for science," he snapped. More calmly he turned to Jerry and said, "You all breathe the same air and drink the same water. I think I've read somewhere that you all have roughly the same stunted intelligence." The uncle stifled a chuckle and sarcastically added, "Intelligence." "What?" Jerry said with a shrug. "Concepts of fairness differ," Uncle Jim said to herself. "It all seems fair to me. You're all basically the same." Jerry huffed silently to himself. He balled his fists and dug them into his sides. "No," he said. "It isn't fair that one person is richer, better looking or luckier than me." The aunt leaned forward and looked at him closely. "Better looking implies that you're good looking in the first place, doesn't it?" Before Jerry could argue, the uncle said, "Richer? Does he mean more full of flavour? Are they eating each other again?" He gave her a stern little glare and said, "No, Jim, he's talking about that money stuff." The uncle gave him a disgruntled expression, as if one of them had sat down too fast in underwear that was too tight. "But that doesn't really exist. I thought we decided that it's just a shared delusion." "It is," he told her. "But he doesn't know that, does he? That's what delusional means." She turned to Jerry and said, "Money doesn't really exist. We think it's a joke that got out of hand." "Of course it exists," Jerry said, scoffing at the idea. How else do you think I pay for my beer? Beer? The uncle shrugged. The aunt rolled his eyes and said, It's the carcinogenic poison that upsets the chemistry of their brains, to both reinforce the delusion and to use it as a coping mechanism for dealing with living inside it. Jim looked at Jerry. She blinked twice and turned back to the aunt. She said finally, We got nothing else to learn from this creature. Let's just kill it with the hilarious spectaculizer. He nodded and huffed a weary sigh. Sure, let's find a better one. Wait, Jerry cried out. You can't kill me. The aunt brandished his metal rod and said very firmly, I most certainly can. The uncle flashed a supportive smile. No, we're not actually going to kill you. We're not without compassion, she said. We'll just turn off the machine, and you'll be sent to the exact moment we snatched you from. You'll die naturally, and we won't be in any way responsible. We sleep very well at night, the aunt told him. But, Jerry muttered weakly, but... The uncle rolled her eyes in a very un-aunt-like way. This again, she muttered to herself. More loudly, she addressed the hapless soldier and said, Well, so long as there's a big splash of your DNA around, it doesn't much matter how long you stay here for. Jerry looked around the almost empty white box. Well, I'm in no rush, he said weakly with a hopeful smile. We get this a lot, the aunt said, pressing some buttons. We have an artificial construct, a simulation you can live in until you're ready to go to your inevitable, painful and horrendous demise. Jerry swallowed audibly and gave him an awkward smile. Are we to take it that's your choice? He asked matter-of-factly, to which Jerry nodded with a huge amount of enthusiasm. Fair enough, the uncle said. You'll like what we've made here. We designed it using all of our research into your pitifully confused species. It's grounded in your reality and is perfectly suited to house you. It's like an animal cage, the aunt told him, but you get to change your own sawdust. With little choice about it, Jerry said, All right, I'll take it. Fine, they both said in unison. As she finished pressing some buttons, the uncle said, You'll love this place. I'm very proud of it. We call it Earth.
At edgeverse.org, all our books, novels and stories are absolutely free. No sign up, no email and no login required. If you would like to help us grow, please consider subscribing, liking and commenting on our videos. Support independent authors and free publishers in building the future of literature.